All right, joined now by NFL Draft college football analyst with the worldwide leader, Jordan Reid. We were talking before we got started. It's been years. You come on with us all the time, but this goes back 7, 8 years you've been coming on with this, man. Now you got a daily draft show. You got all this stuff. Life comes at you fast, man. It's good to see good things happen to good people.
I appreciate it, man. You make me feel old with all these flashbacks.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine
us.
Yeah.
How old we feel,
Seriously.
man. There's an energy that happens over here that only happens in Indy. Whole league's here, kind of the only thing that the whole league kind of goes to. You've been coming here for a while now. What are things that when you're on your way this year that you're most looking forward to just league-wide? Like, what were you curious about heading over here?
I think for me, you always want to talk about the quarterbacks. That's what everybody wants to know about, just exactly where these guys are going to go. With Fernando Mendoza, obviously you can put it in Sharpie that he's going to be the #1 overall pick to the Raiders. But after that, I think things get really interesting with Ty Simpson, depending on where he's going to go. Some people view him as a mid to late first-round pick, while there's others that are more comfortable taking him on day 2. But I think even though there's not a lot of blue-chip talent at the top of this year's draft, everybody's going to label it as a quote-unquote bad draft. I don't think there's ever a such thing as bad drafts. It just makes you work harder to find the talent. And I think this year's draft class, specifically on the defensive side, I think this defensive line class is loaded, and I think there's a lot of depth at linebacker and at DB.
When you look at these quarterbacks in this draft, we were here last year, and everyone's just wait for the 26th draft. You got Klubnik and Drew Aller and Beck and Nussmeier. Do any of those guys still intrigue you?
More so, and I'll say this, if you're looking for a starter in this year's class, this is not the class for you. But if you're looking for a developmental guy or somebody that you want to be a long-term backup, this is a great class for that. And you hit the nail on the head as far as some names. Drew Aller, a lot of people have forgotten about him.
Where do you think he goes?
I would say 3rd or 4th round. I think that's where he ends up going. It just depends on how comfortable you feel about him improving the inaccuracies that he has. The size is great. I mean, he's going to be 6'5", he's going to be 240 pounds, but he just doesn't have the consistent accuracy and showing up in big-time moments that you would love to see out of a day 1 or day 2 potential player. So he's one. Garrett Nussmeier, you talked about him, LSU. If you look at a lot of those way too early mock drafts, including myself, he was seen as a first-round player. But I feel good about Nuss as far as being a long-term backup that potentially could be some more. After that, I think there's some more layers to uncover with his development just because of the daredevil mentality that he plays with. He has that gunslinger mentality that you love to see. He's accurate to all 3 levels of the field as well. Even though the physical traits are not overwhelming, he does have some of those long-term backup traits that you want to see at the position. But one of my favorite dart throws in this year's class is Cole Payton, the quarterback out of North Dakota State. I thought he was really good down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. Only been a 1-year starter there with the Bison, but something that really intrigues me about him is just the physical stature. He's going to come in 6'3", 235 pounds, but I think there's some more left to uncover with him.
When you look at a guy like Drew Aller in particular, and obviously, Cleveland ties, loves the Browns, all of that. Had he played well against Notre Dame 2 years ago, he might have been drafted in the top 10.
Yeah.
And then so it falls here. How are you kind of, if somebody was looking at him and you say, okay, look, the clay's good, you see that. There are things you need to drill in, but how much do you look at what Penn State was doing on offense, the things he's had to deal with while at Penn State? How do you kind of factor those things in? Because it does feel like he's the one guy that we could look back in 5 years and be like, oh, he's got the tools that he could have been great. We should have seen it earlier.
I think the biggest reason is you have to figure out the why. Like, why did he never take that big leap that a lot of people wanted him to take? And is the inaccuracies associated with his mechanics, do you feel that it is improvable? Or why did it not improve over the course of his career? So just how comfortable, whether it's your quarterback coach, offensive coordinator, do you feel comfortable with trying to improve his mechanics? And then also, do you have the leeway to take on a project like that, just because he is a huge project whenever you're talking about correcting the mechanics of a quarterback? Well, from a physical trait standpoint, I think you can make a strong argument that he has the best physical traits of any quarterback in this class. It's just a matter of, is the accuracy actually improvable?
It's nothing we're going to be in on, and you said sharp yet, and that's the consensus that Mendoza's going 1. But I am just curious, where would you have him in comparison to some of the other #1 overall quarterbacks the last 4 or 5 years?
I actually do not like him as much as I did Cam Ward last year. I just don't see the physical traits like a Cam Ward that can withstand having poor surroundings, and we saw Cam have plenty of flashes last year. I just don't think Mendoza is capable of withstanding poor surroundings. And with Mendoza, you're going to hear the comps like Kirk Cousins and Jared Goff and some of those. Matt Ryan is another one that is frequently used. But the player that I wrote down as my comp for Mendoza was Sam Bradford. I think he is very reminiscent of Sam Bradford, somebody that was a number 1 overall pick, that won the Heisman Trophy, stylistically supremely accurate, very smart. Even the personalities are eerily similar to me. And Sam was a really good player when he was healthy. He just didn't stay healthy throughout his career. But with Sam, you always needed those perfect surroundings in order to see his full potential. And I think that's what the Raiders are going to have to do with Mendoza.
What can we learn from the fact that the hottest free agent quarterback this year is Malik Willis, who went in the 3rd round, coming out of Liberty, had a lot of tools. I remember coming to after the combine, there would be, he's going to go in the top 10.
Yeah, for sure.
And then he goes in the 3rd round. Tennessee ultimately gives up on him. He goes to Green Bay and gets kind of with a very good offensive coach in LaFleur. And now he is going to be the top-paid free agent quarterback in the NFL this year, most likely. At least of the ones we know are free agents right now, not counting if Kyler or however any of those things go down. What can we learn from that in this league?
It's just sometimes guys need time to develop, and they don't need to play very early on in his career. I always thought that Malik was going to be a project entering the league just because he had some inaccuracies that was associated with him specifically over the middle of the field. That is where he really struggled. And that's what you see a lot of times with these shorter quarterbacks throughout the league is that they really struggle over the middle of the field. And as a starter quarterback in the NFL, if you can't win over the middle of the field, you're not going to be a starter very long. So I think that was one of the biggest changes that he made as far as improving his accuracy was just his consistency over the middle of the field. And then also at Tennessee, he just didn't have great personnel. Outside of Derrick Henry, he didn't really have a lot of people to throw to outside of A.J. Brown during their time together. But he just wasn't ready to step into a situation where he needed to be the savior. But when he went to Green Bay, he found some coaches that were invested in him. He got to sit behind Jordan Love and really learn the intricacies of playing the position. And then when he went out there, he understood what it took to really be successful.
Yeah, it's an amazing story there. One of the positions that we certainly hope that we will be in on is at wide receiver, and we're going to have to draft a weapon. 3 picks in the top 40. How do you view the top end of this receiver class and then the second tier? How do you kind of see the gap there between those two, and who do you like most?
Well, I think there's a clear big 3 at the top, and you have Cardinal Tate, Mekhi Lemon, and Jordan Tyson. My favorite and my number 1 wide receiver in this class is Cardinal Tate. I just think he brings so many things to the position. He's a silky smooth route runner, doesn't drop anything. He can catch passes outside of his frame. He can dig the ball out if things are low. But he can run every branch on the route tree. And, I mean, you can go back and watch any game from last season. My personal favorite was Wisconsin. He had a catch in the back of the end zone that was just incredible in that one. But I think he's a high-end wide receiver, too, on the next level. The player that he personally reminds me of, he's not this caliber of prospect, but just talking about from a body type standpoint and the way he wins and plays the game is Devontae Smith. I see a lot of Devontae Smith in his game being that skinnier receiver that has outstanding hands. He can win down the field vertically, but also he can be a 3-level threat just because of how well he breaks down or he sinks his weight. He can snap off routes in the short to intermediate areas too. So Devontae Smith, Cardinal Tate is very reminiscent of Devontae Smith. And then after that, Jordan Tyson, depending on the medicals with him, he could find himself going in that mid to late first-round range. But after that, you have that second tier. That second tier consists of Omar Cooper out of Indiana, who's really catching steam here lately. Denzel Boston out of Washington, who I think is very underrated. A lot of people have been scared of that archetype just because it hasn't translated well, but I think he's a much better athlete than some of the players of that archetype or that stature that we have seen.
Like, what if he runs? What does he need to run, or what does he need to show agility-wise to make you say, okay, this guy could be a real X?
I think as long as he keeps it below like 4.52, 4.53, that range, I think I would be very comfortable.
If he runs more mid 4.4s, you'll be.
Oh, absolutely. I'll be completely sold on him. And, he runs that low 4.5 on tape, but just his hand strength to catch the ball out of the air, that's something that really stands out about him. And, in the offense that they want to run in Cleveland, they need that big body guy that can go down the field. But if they don't like Boston, there's a real huge cluster of those types in this draft. I'm thinking of Malachi Fields at Notre Dame, Ted Hurst at Georgia State, Chris Brazzell at Tennessee, those big-body guys that can win down the field and win when they climb the ladder to catch the football.
When you think about the Browns at 6-24 with their first 2 picks, if you were thinking, like, let's just say that those are going to be a receiver and a tackle or a tackle and a receiver, how do you see that shaking out in terms of the value prop? Would you want that receiver early and then a tackle, or is there a tackle that you say, man, this guy is so good, we got to get that tackle, and then we'll worry about the clump of receivers at 24?
I would want the receiver first, just because I think there's a clear big 3 right now with those 3 that we mentioned, and they may even have their pick of the litter, especially if those defensive ends come off of the board within that 2 to 5 range. With the Jets, the Cardinals, and the Titans, we could see 3 defensive linemen go 2, 3, 4 consecutively. Depending on what the Giants do, they could take a receiver, but if they do take one, you still have a chance of those big 3 at the top of the draft. So I would go receiver first, but the great thing about being at 24, I think that is right in the middle of the sweet spot of where we're going to see what I think 7 offensive tackles go in the first round. So speaking of Blake Miller at Clemson, I think he's firmly in that range. Max Iheanacho at Arizona State, he's one that's in that range. Monroe Freeland, depending on how he tests, I think he's probably going to test himself out of that range, but he's someone that could be in that target area. And Caden Proctor at Alabama, depending on how you feel about him.
It's going to be interesting because you're right. That's kind of what you're looking at here if you're the Browns. And then just when you're talking about these receivers and even this tackle class, how do you kind of stack these against recent classes? Like last year we loved Tet McMillan, then Ibuka was, I think, the next receiver off the board. How do you slot like Carnell Tate in that big 3 with those guys?
I don't think he's the caliber of receiver as those 2. I love those 2. In last year's class, I love Tet, and then I love Emeka Ibuka. Those were such clean evaluations to me. So he would be a tier below those guys, in my honest opinion. And then this offensive tackle class, it would be a tier below last year's class, too. I don't think there's a Will Campbell or a Kelvin Banks or Armand Membu. I just don't see that type of talent in this year's class.
So would you be thinking maybe move out of 6 if that was the positions you were targeting? Because – maybe the top 6 guys, or maybe Downs is in that group, Jeremiah Love is in that group, and that's probably not the direction, or even a Sonny Styles. But off ball, we just drafted Swessinger. We just drafted Judkins.
The issue with that, though, it takes 2 to tango, and I don't think there's a team that's going to be willing or rushing to trade up, just because really the players, you select from really 5 all the way through 20 to 25 in this draft. They're all in the same bucket as far as like the grades that you have in this year's class. So that's why I think we're going to have a very status quo first round. I don't think a lot of teams are going to be willing to move around, one, for the reason that I just said, the lack of blue chip talent, but also teams know what's coming in 2027. They scout ahead. That is a quote-unquote loaded draft. They understand what's coming potentially in next year's class too.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out. He is Jordan Reid. Watch him on NFL Draft Daily. Mel Kiper, Field Yates, Matt Miller, Louis Riddick, Mike Tannenbaum. It's an incredible show, folks, to lead you up. It's great to have you, buddy. Great to see you again. So happy for all your success. Thank you for your time.
Thank you guys as always for having me.